Greetings everyone, and here we are again, back with another video, continuing our saga for the real Odyssey. For those of you that are new to the series, again, this is the fourth video, the fourth trial. I'm breaking down each trial to a very small, quick video where I have the synopsis of what actually happens in the trial, just generally, and then I jump into a descriptive symbolism, description of the symbolism, and the interpretation of what it's actually trying to show as a trial. Again, in the purpose of actual free thinking and being able to use our own mind and being able to analyze, project, interpret, find similarities, connect the dots, and so on and so forth. None of this is things that people should take for face value, regardless of whether I believe it or I don't believe it, whether a lot of us know about all these, symbolisms and whatnot, and we have had, a lot of highest conversations within some closed circles where there's been a lot of conversations with regards to the symbolism of the Odyssey, blah blah blah. That's irrelevant to you. Just look at all these things and don't take them as face value, and try to see them as a exercise in free thinking and trying to see how all these symbolisms kind of connect to you. How do they resonate to you, and how could you pull from these examples into your own real life, and how we can actually interpret this as some basic lessons, simple lessons that can help us move forward in our life and become better people ultimately. Let's just not go as deep as saying, hitting you over the head in each video telling you that it's the return to the light. It is the return to the light, but let's just, make it simpler. As I say, this is a way or a path for us becoming better, a better version of ourselves than we were yesterday. See these videos and see the interpretations, see the trials, what they're for, what the symbolisms are all about, and think of it for yourself and, trying to come up with your own conclusions with regards to any examples in your own life that have actually, been able to align with these trials. Ultimately, at the end of all this, compare it to Nolan's Abomination as well, and realize why some of us are very disappointed, to say the very least, disappointed in what Nolan is actually doing, or what Hollywood is doing, but we're not surprised at all. And also, again, once more, you notice that a lot of these symbolisms, which is something that I said on an older video, and I've also said a couple other times as well, these aren't rocket science. These are pretty obvious and simple, symbolisms. Which kind of begs the question of, like, how could they not grasp this when they were reading this context, all these Hollywood executives, or high-level, high-class translators and interpreters? How could they not figure these, symbolisms out? Because they're not here to be true to the material. They're here to just indoctrinate and pass their own versions and their own visions on top of the story, and to try to defile the story, so they can change it from its initial meaning, which is the return of the soul to the light, into something completely different. Why? Because darkness does not want you to have these kind of stories, access to these kind of stories, and it definitely doesn't want to represent them the correct way, because these are small nuggets of remembrance that allow you to remember of what you're supposed to be doing and how you're supposed to be kind of like, handling certain situations in your life. And they're like, well, that's quite liberating, isn't it? And we don't want to do that as Hollywood. No, we want you to be slaves. So let's jump right into it. This is the fourth trial. This is Aeolus and the Bag of Winds. Aeolus. So this is the trial of, this is, again, how obvious can some of this get? The trial of self-discipline. So let's jump right into it. The very quick, simple synopsis. After escaping the Cyclops, they find Odysseus and his men. They go to the island of Aeolus, the keeper of the winds. He is the god of the wind. Aeolus welcomes them. He gives Odysseus his, I think, Poseidon's cousin, I'm not sure. Gives Odysseus a bag containing all the unfavorable winds, and then he sends them with favorable west wind to Ithaca, straight home. Everything's great. They sail for 9 days. They're almost there. And while Odysseus sleeps, his men open the bag thinking that it contains gold and silver. All the winds burst out, creating a violent storm that drives them all the way back to the island of Aeolus. Aeolus, seeing they are cursed by the gods, refuses to help them again and sends them away. That's it. That's the synopsis. Again, driving the point home that they keep saying certain things such as, all the interpretations were different over, as the bards were adding and changing things. This core will never change. It has been the same thing. Now, whether they're done a little bit like this or they're done a little bit like that, or how the conversations were, like, each poet and each bard is going to add something in there. It's kind of like ad libs, when you have like an actor where they're kind of like, adding a little bit to the whole conversation and whatnot. So we're taking that, like a lot of these guys that are trying to excuse how much they have veered off from the Odyssey. They keep trying to use that whole example of, not all the versions that we're seeing were exactly like the original initial one. It's like ad-libbing. I am portraying a certain character, and now during the whole verses and how they were actually saying them, the interaction, like this is the synopsis. Now the interaction of this is much longer. Like for example, it could be a whole verse with regards to the inner thoughts of maybe this treasure, maybe there's this, maybe there's that, maybe all this whole kind of like, or how that whole situation happened, or how they got how they became impatient and they wanted to see what's inside the bags and whatnot. But and how that whole situation kind of like happened. This can be said in a million ways, but the core of the story remains the same. And for the most part, these general basic outlines have remained the same. And now, if there are some extra parts that have been added here and there, you can tell that this is so consistent with regards to what it's trying to portray and what it's trying to show, that it doesn't feel at any point of time anywhere near outside the cohesiveness of the entire piece of the puzzle. Like even if there are things that might be changed or added, they are still going towards in the same direction. And that shows because once you lay out the entire story, it has a cohesiveness and it doesn't change character. And that's very important to keep in mind. Like when you look at this entire work, there's a cohesiveness there. It's not just making shit up. It doesn't just change from being one story to becoming another story halfway down the poem or halfway down the translation or whatever the case may be. So that's a very highly debunked, stupid kind of like notions. Each bard was saying their own version. Like you almost make it sound as if it's saying a different story every time. That's not the case. But anyway, even if that is the case, and the finalized version that we actually got was the written version that we got in ancient Greece, and that was the finalized version, whatever the case may be, let's just say that that's the case. Let's just say for 1,000 years or for 800 years, or for 500, 600 years, however long this poem was being passed down, it was constantly, changed and constantly being slowly molded through the history of culture and heritage in the ancient Hellenic period and the ancient Hellenic history. Even if that's the case, and through all those 500 years it was slowly molded into that final piece that was actually written down in more classical Hellas, even if that's the case, once we had the final version, the finalized version, that has remained the same for 2,000 plus years. So again, you can't make this silly, idiotic kind of like, remarks. Maybe it was a work of, a work in progress and slowly refining itself until it became the finalized, it took its final form. Whatever the case may be, it's part of antiquity. It's part of the Hellenic heritage. It's part of the Hellenic culture. And as an extension, it is part of the Hellenic history. Despite the fact that it's also based on historical figures and historical events as well, this one here is much less so because it is kind of the representation of the internal journey of a soul or a person returning back home to the light, in other words. Okay, so whatever the case may be, once this has been completed as a work of art, as I've said in some previous videos, you don't mess around with it and you don't change it. So I don't use the F word and start dropping F-bombs again in these videos. I want to keep these videos a little bit more clean and more concise with regards to just the information that we are gathering here. This specific video here on the Aeolus and the Bag of Winds, which is pretty much the trial of self-discipline. It's so self-explanatory that it gave me an opportunity to really dive into a couple of extra things again and have a little small segue and remind you as I'm going, hit you over the head constantly over certain ideas here with regards to cohesiveness and with regards to some of the lies that they say, and they try to constantly change and make it sound as if, it's not history, it's not this, it's not that, it's just mythology. What is mythology? Mythology is how the ancient Greeks, how the ancient Hellenes passed on history. That's what mythology is. And I've explained that in previous videos as well. That's what it is. And they've done it through stories and whatnot. And also at the same time, some stories were much more symbolic and they were much more about like an internal state, like the story of the Odyssey. That's why it is a story as old as time. Some of them were much more based on actual events and wars and things that actually happened. And some were in between. Whatever the case may be, it is part of our cultural heritage and history. Because these tales formed and shaped a lot of the Hellenic thinking and the Hellenic culture. All these stories, all these myths, all these gods, all this stuff. And have remained as thus for the last 2,000 years. Even if you get a folklore story from any country all over the world, a folklore story that they told their children for generations, for 1,000 years, much less 2,000 years, it's part of their history. It is history. You have no right to change it and mess around with it. So, what is the trial of self-discipline? Simple. As close as you can get to your goal, you can lose everything by just, having a lack of discipline. And having a lack of trust in the final stretch. That's it. That's what I'm saying. These symbolisms are pretty darn easy to figure out. The bag of winds is the controlled forces of life. When kept close through patience and leadership, they can carry us home. Okay. When opened out of greed, curiosity, and impatience, chaos returns. It shows the painful lesson that even when the path seems clear and success within sight, one moment of weakness and mistrust can throw us back to the beginning. And that's something that I have said in other videos as well before, that if you force it too much or if you rush too much, it's another thing that they have in some Christian or some metaphysical, and also I think in the East some scriptures, that he who rushes too much is going to trip over themselves. Everything has to happen at the right point of time, and you need to slowly evolve into transcendence. And it's not something that just happens 1 minute to the other. If anything, that shows that you're not ready for it. And I think that this symbolizes that situation, that state as well. Odysseus and his whole crew, which are the parts and the pieces within Odysseus himself, which obviously, if you notice by the end of it, it's only pretty much him that returns, because he overcame all those parts inside him, all those pieces inside himself. Okay? Lacking discipline can straight away throw you off the path, and even though you think that you're at the end of the stretch, it means nothing, because if you lack discipline and if you lack the combined, united understanding of everything you should have learned, and it's not really like a solid pillar inside you in terms of understanding and belief, you can easily trip over and fall all the way back down. Now, what's very interesting is that the bag of winds is the controlled forces of life. We're kept close through patience and leadership that can carry us home. I guess the symbolism behind that, I haven't really looked into it, but if I had to just, guess on the top of my head, like the winds of life and the forces of life, if you keep them controlled and you're very patient with them, you can mold and patience in the third dimension or in life itself. When you actually, like growing plants and seeds, you need to have patience, and then the result is going to give you, the fruit of the trees that are going to be, that are going to grow. Just generally that once you control with patience and discipline the forces of life, they get you to your goal and your result. Now, if you rush and you don't have discipline, then you can just stumble back down, and like the example that I just gave right now for the fruit trees or the trees or whatever they are, if you're too eager to actually see if if your plants have grown, your plants of potatoes, they didn't have any potatoes in ancient Greece, but if your plant of potatoes, if you're too eager to see if they're ready, when you can pull them out before they're ready, then you've pretty much ruined, you ruined those potatoes. You have to have discipline, and you have to have patience, and you have to see it through. And I would also argue that this is a lesson of molding, that the stretch and the final stretch to being home is ultimately very easy. What's difficult is our ability to be very steady, and not just through discipline, but collected. And that's ultimately what Odysseus achieves at the end with the trial of the axes. So again, very simple symbolism here, which, by the way, there can be a lot more symbolisms in every one of these things, and look at every different parts and different specific words, and build on top of that symbolism. And that's the beauty of when somebody actually knows what the context is about and what it's about and what the symbolism is about. The things that they might add, each bard that adds to the references and to the poems is adding towards that and molding towards that same direction and that same reference and that same symbolism. Okay, but this is the general census of what that trial is about. Let's keep it simple, stupid. Again, the Odyssey is not rocket science, and neither is Hellenic mythology. It's not rocket science, and most of it, you'll notice, most of it, not all, but most of it, is pretty simple. Now, there are some much more difficult ones, and I have given some examples in previous videos, but for the most part, most of the ancient Hellenic mythology is pretty easy to decipher. It's not even really deciphering. It's almost as if they're outright blatantly telling you, if you're not patient and you're not disciplined, this is what's going to happen. It's barely even any symbolism at this point. That's how straightforward these stories are. That's why when they mess around with them, it's even more baffling to the mind, because How can you not see the cohesiveness and what the story is about, and you're changing and ruining everything all over the place? How can you not understand what this is about? Are you that ignorant? Or are you that vile and that evil that this story, because it resonates with the return home, and it is a story of light, you want to destroy it so much that you want to represent it to the modern audiences in a manner that completely misrepresents the essence and the true core of what this story is about? Maybe. Just a thought. It is suspect, and it does make you think that it's deliberate. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you all on the next one, and until then, peace be with you.